In the breathtaking landscapes of Tasmania, where rolling hills fade into the sea and tourists wander through history, an unimaginable nightmare unfolded. It would become the darkest chapter in modern Australian history. This is the story of Martin Bryant and the Port Arthur Massacre. Martin Bryant was born on May 7, 1967, in Hobart, Tasmania. From his earliest years, Martin was different. Teachers described him as disruptive, slow to learn, and emotionally unstable. As a child, he was diagnosed with an intellectual disability and a personality disorder. He struggled to connect with other children. He was often bullied for being odd, and his unpredictable behavior pushed people away. Neighbors recalled him tormenting animals, breaking toys, and lashing out without reason. His mother, Carlene, found it difficult to manage him. His father, Maurice, was more patient, a steady hand in Martin's chaotic world. But even within his own family, Martin often felt like an outsider. He longed for friendship, for acceptance. Instead, he found isolation. He grew up with few friends, and a deep sense of resentment began to form. In the early 1990s, Martin's life took a strange turn. He met Helen Harvey, an eccentric 54-year-old heiress to the Tattersall's lottery fortune. Helen was wealthy, reclusive, and known for her obsession with cats and dogs. Her crumbling mansion in Hobart housed dozens of animals, creating a life of chaos that matched Martin's restless energy. Despite the enormous age difference, Martin was in his 20s, Helen in her 50s. The two became inseparable. To outsiders, it was bizarre. But to Martin, Helen provided companionship, attention, and something he had rarely experienced: acceptance. They drove together through Tasmania, often in expensive cars Helen purchased. They dined out, shopped lavishly, and indulged in reckless spending. Where society dismissed Martin as a misfit, Helen treated him as an equal. But Helen's wealth and lifestyle also fueled Martin's dependency. He grew used to the money, the trips, the eccentric comfort of her home. Their relationship was strange, somewhere between friendship, companionship, and dependency. But for Martin, it was everything. In 1992, tragedy struck. Helen Harvey died in a car crash while Martin was a passenger. He survived, but Helen's sudden death shattered him. For the first time, he was completely alone again. Not long after, another devastating blow came. Martin's father, Maurice, the one stabilizing figure in his life, drowned in a dam. Many believed it was suicide, brought on by financial stress and depression. For Martin, the back-to-back losses of Helen and Maurice were catastrophic. In a matter of months, he lost the only two people who had given him care and structure. Suddenly, he inherited Helen's fortune and property, but with no one left to guide him, he spiraled further into isolation. Neighbors later recalled Martin behaving erratically. He would laugh at inappropriate moments, talk to himself, and lash out. Despite the wealth he now controlled, he remained profoundly lonely. The boy who never fit in had become a man consumed by anger, bitterness, and disconnection from reality. In the months before the massacre, Martin Bryant's behavior grew increasingly troubling. Restless and isolated, he often traveled long distances alone, wandering aimlessly through towns and back roads. Neighbors recalled his strange laughter, his unpredictable mood swings, and his unsettling habit of speaking about violence. He also began stockpiling weapons. Exploiting Tasmania's weak gun laws at the time, Martin purchased high-powered rifles and ammunition with little restriction. To some acquaintances, he confided vague but chilling intentions that he wanted to do something big, something that would make people remember him. Most dismissed it as empty talk, but behind those words lay a dangerous obsession. On April 28, 1996, a crisp autumn Sunday, the Port Arthur historic site bustled with life. Once a grim penal colony, it had been reborn as a major tourist attraction, drawing visitors from across Australia and the world. Families wandered among the ruins, children played in the courtyards, and couples strolled hand in hand through the gardens. Tour buses arrived steadily, unloading travelers eager to see the island's history. The Broad Arrow Cafe, the centerpiece of the site, was alive with chatter and the smell of hot meals. Strangers shared tables, swapping travel stories over coffee and sandwiches. Laughter filled the air. It was a picture of peace, a calm Sunday in a beautiful place. But for Martin Bryant, Port Arthur was not a sanctuary. To him, it was the perfect stage for an act of unspeakable violence, one that would shock Australia and the world. Martin arrived carrying a large sports bag. Inside, a semi-automatic rifle. He sat in the Broad Arrow Cafe, ordered a meal, and watched. Then, without warning, he stood, drew his weapon, and opened fire. In just 15 seconds, 12 people were killed. Families ducked under tables, screams filled the air, but Martin moved calmly, methodically, shooting at anyone in his path. He left the cafe, continuing his rampage outside. Tourists and locals scattered in panic as gunfire echoed across the site. Couples were gunned down together, parents fell protecting their children, strangers became targets simply for being there. The horror spread to the car park and beyond, where Martin hunted down victims with chilling precision. At a nearby guest house, he took hostages and killed more people before setting the building on fire. By the time the bloodshed ended, 35 people were dead. 23 more were injured. The massacre had lasted little more than half an hour, but its impact would last forever. Among the dead were people from all walks of life. A mother shielding her daughter, cut down while trying to save her child. An elderly couple, visiting Tasmania to celebrate their retirement, killed side by side. Young tourists from overseas, whose families would receive devastating phone calls thousands of miles away. Locals, who had simply come for a day out, never to return home. One survivor recalled crawling through shattered glass, the sound of bullets still ringing in her ears. Another described holding her dying husband's hand as chaos raged around them. For families, the pain was indescribable. One father, who lost his wife and children, said, "I walked into Port Arthur with my family. I walked out alone." The massacre tore apart dozens of families, leaving grief that could never be healed. After fleeing the scene, Martin holed up in a nearby guest house, holding hostages. He set fire to the building, but police eventually surrounded him. After hours of standoff, he emerged with severe burns. He was taken into custody, confused, muttering, sometimes laughing. The man responsible for the worst mass shooting in Australian history was finally caught. In November 1996, Martin Bryant faced court. He pleaded guilty to 35 counts of murder and 23 counts of attempted murder. The court sentenced him to 35 life sentences, plus 1,035 years without parole. To this day, Martin remains imprisoned in Tasmania's Risdon prison, under strict supervision, his life forever removed from society. The massacre sent shockwaves across the nation. Grief and anger spread through communities. Vigils were held, memorials created, and families struggled with the unbearable weight of loss. But from the tragedy came sweeping change. The Australian government, led by Prime Minister John Howard, introduced some of the world's strictest gun laws. Semi-automatic rifles and shotguns were banned. A national gun buyback program destroyed more than 600,000 firearms. It was a decisive moment. Australia said never again, and remarkably, there has not been another massacre of the same scale since. Today, Port Arthur is both a tourist site and a place of mourning. A peaceful memorial garden stands where blood once stained the ground. Visitors walk quietly, reading the names of the victims, reflecting on the fragility of life. For survivors and families, the scars remain. Many still struggle with trauma. Some will never fully recover, but they continue to honor those who were lost. The massacre is remembered not just for the horror of that day, but for the resilience that followed, for the voices of victims' families who turned grief into advocacy, and for a nation that transformed its laws to protect future generations. Martin Bryant's life was marked by isolation, dependency, and tragedy, but his choices on that April day were his own. They destroyed lives, shattered families, and changed a nation forever. The Port Arthur Massacre is not only a story of death. It is a story of love stolen, of families broken, but also of resilience, reform, and remembrance. 35 lives lost, dozens more scarred, an entire nation transformed. Port Arthur will never be forgotten, and the vow remains clear: never again.